perspectives people. Look at that. Awesome. So you guys know our wonderful beloved Dr. Guy. He's here today giving us part 2 on human fulfillment and emotions, and hopefully some stuff on the brain, I'm guessing. So he's gonna lead us through this next presentation. At the break, I'll have Michelle also say a few words from Havenwick. She brought us breakfast this morning, so thank you for that. So Dr. Guy, would you have go ahead?
Yes. Today what we're going to be doing is finishing up the series that I kind of started last time on fulfillment. And this one is it was difficult to put together because the tangents. All right, it really is. There were a lot of tangents on this one because it touches on so many different areas, and all these areas are fascinating to talk about. So it deals with not only neuroscience but philosophy and deep parts of personality disorders. So it covers a lot of ground because the subject of fulfillment is absolutely huge, and we're really just touching the surface here. These latter aspects of fulfillment are very much deeply rooted in ethics, and so we have a lot. We're going to be talking about that quite a bit in terms of how that affects our fulfillment. Okay, because when people are unfulfilled, very bad things happen. Okay, and so it's important that when we're assessing patients, that we get a sense of where is this person in terms of getting enough of what they need. Where are they? And this is a talk. When I talk about those 5 needs, love and belonging, and purpose, and self-respect, and respect from others, freedom from excessive manipulation, and positive emotion. I'll often go over this with the patient on the first visit, and then I'll say, can you think of any holes that might be going on in your life? And invariably, if they have really bad depression, they'll go all 5. Okay? And so when I'm approaching them, I'm thinking, okay, yeah, medicine's going to be helpful, but some things that you need to go over with your therapist is, okay, let's talk about the holes that you have and what can you do? What are some steps that you can take to fill them in? All right? Because if you remain unfulfilled, I doubt my medicine is going to help you that much. It'll help. I mean, what do SSRIs do? They raise serotonin levels, and serotonin basically reduces restlessness. So you're less restless, but you're still empty. Right? And if you're still empty, you're probably not going to do well. That's just a fact. You need fulfillment. And so that's why this topic is really, really important. All right, let me get started here. See if this works. Okay. All right. There are today epic levels of unfulfillment. I mean, it's really kind of scary. What's happening in Western civilization, it's not just the United States, it's the West. In Canada and Europe right now, they have a significant antidepressant shortage. They can't produce generic antidepressants fast enough. The demand is outstripping the supply. We're having shortages in the United States for the first time. Last week I had a patient come in that couldn't get his Effexor 75 milligram dose. That's the most common dose. Effexor is one of the most common antidepressants used. And there's an Effexor shortage, along with several of antidepressants. I mean, it's a good time to be in mental health because everybody's needing our help. All right, we have a suicide rate that I think I mentioned before. It's to show you how unfulfilled we are. Look at the suicide rates. Suicide between 1999 and 2017, it went up by 33 1/3. Now, if you add that to the number of people who are offing themselves with opiates, you got a lot of people dying because they're not fulfilled. Okay, now, are opiate deaths related to unfulfillment? Are they? Yeah, we've had opiates for how long now? Opiates have been around for a very, very long time. Why are people suddenly dying in droves? Why are people taking the risk now? Well, one of the reasons is the government. The government did this in some way. When they made it very difficult for people to get their regular narcotics from their doctor, and a lot of doctors just cut people off their narcotics cold turkey, many people went to heroin and died. And that was one. So they contributed. They're not admitting it, but that's exactly what happened. All right, they just made it so a lot of primary care doctors started getting, government regulation looking over your shoulder, and they says, you know what, I'm not going to prescribe. And they just took people off of their opiates cold turkey in droves, and they went right to the street. And guess what? You don't know what you're getting on the street, and a little bit of fentanyl goes a long way and can kill you, and that's what happened. So that did. But the other thing is that people that may not have considered opiates considered them because life is empty, because there's nothing to look forward to, and when they try opiates and get that happy, they go, whoa, this is what I want. I like this feeling. I'm not getting it through normal fulfillment, so I'll get it through drugs, and then they end up dying. All right? I had a patient just like last week at one of my locations, and I'm trying to, we've been working on this marijuana situation here. And he loves to smoke his blunts. He loves his marijuana. And I've explained to him how many times why this is not good. You're a young guy. It's affecting you cognitively. It takes away your motivation. It's really not good for your anxiety and depression. It makes it worse. And so I'm explaining this. And he's going, I don't care about that. I'm never giving it up. And what is it about? He says, well, I'll be honest. This is the deal. Is that when I don't smoke weed, I start feeling lonely. I don't have a girlfriend, and I'm so sad about that, and I just can't handle this. And so when I smoke weed, I don't care. And that's why I smoke it, because when I'm high, I don't care that I'm alone. And I said, okay, this kind of ensures that you might stay that way, though. Okay, I mean, but the bottom line is about feeling. It's about, I don't want to feel the hole. Now, the whole, remember I mentioned we have 5 needs. Number 1 is love and belonging. Now, when people talk about, I don't have a girlfriend, well, that could mean different things. It doesn't necessarily mean they want actual company and they're lonely. It could mean that they're just looking to something to satisfy their libido. All right. However, love and belonging is a very big need. And if there's a big hole there, it does hurt. Okay? That hurts quite a bit. It's one of the most painful holes that there are. Now, so anyway, that was his justification for using drugs, and I think that's a justification for a lot of people. What does it mean to be fulfilled? Well, one definition is to be satisfied because of fully developing one's abilities or character. All right, I'm achieving what I was meant to achieve. I have these skills, and I'm finally able to use these skills for something productive, okay? The other definition is to experience a sense of having enough of what is most important. Enough. All right? I am filled. I am filled with enough of what I need. Fulfilled. That's the most basic definition there is. So what we mean, as I mentioned before, for human fulfillment, we need enough of what we need. Enough. Now, before we get to these guys, there are 3 needs that come before these guys. Enough food, clothing, and shelter. Okay? That's kind of big there. Enough food, clothing, shelter, safety. Those are needs too, okay? But emotional needs are number 1, love and belonging, and then purpose, then respect, then freedom from excessive manipulation, and positive emotion. So being fulfilled is having enough of the things that you need so that you don't feel the hole. Okay? That's what it is. And that's what we want to target for people. Now, I'm going to step back here and talk a little bit about love again, because now we're introducing the topic of ethics and needs. And so I'm going to go back and kind of apply it to the first 2, because last time we talked about love and belonging and purpose. So let's go back and just address the relationship between ethics and love. Okay, big thing. And there's a saying, there's a thin line between love and hate. Anybody know where that came from? Came from a song by the Persuaders from the 1950s. And it was entitled, There's a Thin Line Between Love and Hate. Okay? And then there was a movie. I don't know if anybody actually watched it. I never heard of it until I looked it up on YouTube. But anyway, there's a movie by the same name. There's a thin line between love and hate based on the song. Now, the question is, people, they make that statement. Is it true? Is it really true? And I submit, if you think about it and you understand your definitions, that's not true at all. It's wrong. There's not a thin line between love and hate. There's a huge difference and a huge chasm between love and hate. Where there's a thin line is between infatuation and hate. okay? Because infatuation is obsessive, intrusive thoughts of somebody, and hatred involves obsessive, intrusive thoughts. All right? Infatuation is very selfish. Yeah, you know, infatuation sees the object and says, you're an object, a means to an end. It's about how I feel. I love me, I want you. Okay? That's infatuation. It's very self-centered. I love the way you make me feel about me. All right? That's infatuation. Now, it's like a drug thing, because there are people who are in love with being in love. I mean, there are songs about that all over the place, and it's true. People are they're not so concerned about the object of their love. They just want that feeling. I just want to feel that. And that's what they mean when they say they don't have a girlfriend or boyfriend, is they want to have that experience of being in love, all right? Now the problem, if it's used as a drug to make one feel good, then what happens when it's threatened? What happens when it's threatened? I don't want anybody to make this feeling go away, including the object of your infatuation. And so once they start pulling away, anger and then hatred. And that's where there's a thin line between obsessive infatuation and hate. Yeah, that's a thin line, because it's like a drug. You're killing my buzz, man. You know, I was feeling good. You come along talking about breaking up, you know. All right, I hate you. Okay? Why did you put me through this? I don't want to go through this. So then I'm going to go through withdrawal. We know how people love withdrawal, right? And there is a withdrawal here. All right? Remember when I had a dog named Champ many years ago, my mother told me, okay, when you give him that bone, don't ever try to take a bone back from a dog. When you give it to him, you just leave it there. Don't ever do that. Why? Because they'll bite you. And I remember, so she left. And I'm thinking, that's not true. Champ is my best friend. He would never bite me. You know, he's never bit me, okay? I mean, I raised him from a puppy. And so I had to test the hypothesis. You know what? She was right. Amazing. Wow. You know, he did bite me. It's like, I can't believe that. How did she know? Man, Mom is so smart. Okay? Yeah. And it's because dogs are dogs. I mean, that lower instinct, you take away something they like, and they bite you because they like it more than you at the time. That's what selfish drives are. There's a very big difference between infatuation and love. I mean, infatuation is very self-focused, it's very immediate gratification focused. Love is it's a much bigger animal. Love, it takes longer to develop. It's a choice on the part of the giver. It emphasizes character. It is very giving. I choose to give to you because I want to. All right, not because you're going to immediately give me something back. I choose to value you. That's what's called devotion. It expects to work at happiness. It's concerned about how the person is doing, and it's not conditional. Okay, you accept the person without trying to change them. These are all mature. These are aspects of mature love. Very different than what you have with infatuation. All right. So love and belonging. In order to maintain love and belonging, there are behaviors that need to be happening on a regular basis. In order for affection to be maintained, you have to have responsible, consistent choices of self-sacrifice. Anybody who's been married successfully will tell you that both parties have to say, you know, this is going to be some work, and we have to be careful what we say and what we do, and we have to be ready to apologize, because you are going to step on each other's toes. There's a lot of work involved, and you have to be willing to do that. Now, before he became president, I remember there's a quote by Donald Trump that I sometimes use in these kind of things, where I'd say, you know, he was married to one wife, and she was on some talk show and talking about it, and she says, Donald, you know, we have to work at this marriage thing. You can't just expect it to work like this. And he goes, well, if it's work, it's not worth it. You know, something along those lines. You know, he was less mature than he is now. So, you know, but you know, it's like, well, wait a minute, okay, it requires work. Okay, no, it's like, it's not a fairy tale. It's not like you fall in love and you never fall out again because you're on the wrong planet. That doesn't happen. Okay, affection has to be nurtured and watered and maintained with work and sacrifice. Okay? Consistent choices. Now, how does unethical behavior sabotage affection? Now, this stuff is like duh. So some of the stuff I'm about to go through is like, it's really not that complex, and you get it right away, but I need to stress this because we're going to go deep into the ethics here. All right, here's a real case that I've had in the past. And it's kind of a sad one, and it's one that got my attention because of the complexity and of the interactions in this situation. All right, so Joan is my patient, right? And she's really depressed and can't sleep and stressed because of this domestic situation. Their son Mark, Joan and her husband Frank, they have this son Mark. And Mark is a fireman, and he met this girl at a party, and very quickly they got into a physical relationship, and before he got to know her, he got her pregnant. So he moves in with her, they're going to raise this baby, and Mom, Joan and Cindy don't get along. Cindy's the girlfriend, and boy, there is huge animosity. From the way Joan described Cindy, sounds like she might be a little borderline. I don't know for sure because I've never met her, but it's pretty rough. And so Cindy, according to Joan, poisoned Mark against them because Mark used to be their favorite son. So anyway, increasingly, Mark stopped, his visits became less and less and less. And so that was a bad thing. So anyway, they were living in this apartment, and Mark complained, how are we ever going to be able to afford a house because we're paying, $1,200 rent for this apartment, and how are we supposed to pay up for a house? And so they're complaining. And so Joan and her husband, they have two houses. They have one nice house in this part of the state, and then they have a lake house in one of the nearby cities. And it's a smaller home, but they said, okay, tell you what, this is a little vacation house for us, and they let family members stay there as well. So, but tell you what we're going to do, I'll let you guys can stay at the lake house. Instead of paying, $1,200 a month, you can stay there, oh, bless you, for only $300. Only $300 a month. So you can save, you'll be saving like $700, $800 a month. And so that way you can afford a down payment. So that was the deal. So they move in, right? They paid the first month's rent, and every month thereafter for the next year they had an excuse as to why they didn't have that $300. Had to take the dog to the vet. Car broke down. The carpeting in the one room looked shabby, so we had to replace it. There's always an excuse. And finally, they were going, this is ridiculous. It caused some estrangement. And so Mark stopped coming around because he started owing money to his parents, and he wasn't paying. He's just giving excuses. And so they stopped showing up. Well, after they hadn't seen the guy in over a year, I was going, what is going on here? This is terrible. And we need to talk to him because he just wasn't coming around anymore. So finally, her husband goes to the lake house to find out, okay, Mark, what's going on? Why are you ignoring us, and why haven't you paid? They see a for sale sign. Sold. Mark snuck into the house, found out where his father kept the deed, and sold the house. And went and moved to Howell and bought himself a house with what he made on their home. So he stole his house from his parents. Okay? Now, this right here, it just caught my attention. So I'm thinking, that is like one of the most amazing things. That's like, wow. That really happened. Yeah, that really happened. Okay? Now the thing is, in order to do such a heinous thing, what you have to do is value moving into a house now more than your parents. And so in doing that, he said, okay, I'm going to sacrifice my parents. My children are never going to know their grandparents. That's this plan, just cut them off. Now finally, when they were confronted, because they tracked them down, and they found the new house, and they went over there, and they said, okay, explain yourself. And the explanation was, you had two houses. It's not that big a deal. You had two houses. So, we just sold one. And that was their explanation for it. Okay? And so that's what a trade-off. Now, they say, wow. See how ethics are important? In this situation, it's, basically greed outranks loyalty. Greed outranks love. And the prefrontal cortex, the anterior prefrontal cortex, one of the jobs of the anterior prefrontal cortex is salience assignment. It tells you what is most important of the things that you have going on in your life right now, or in this situation, what is most important. It allows you to prioritize. You notice how people with ADHD, one of the reasons they're so distracted is they're surrounded with all these responsibilities, obligations, and stimuli, and they can't get started because they can't figure out where to start, what is most important. And when they're on their medicine, they can focus in on projects and get things done. That's one of the things that stimulants do well. because you're increasing dopamine in the anterior prefrontal cortex, and it's doing its job of salience assignment. You know, this is a different kind of salience. This is social salience in terms of how valuable are relationships to you compared to materialistic things. What is more important? Now, this is an example of extreme materialism to the point where you would sacrifice your parents for a house. That's about as an extreme example of pathologic materialism as I've come across. Okay? All right, and ultimately this ends up doing something else, grandparent alienation. This epidemic right now, not just in the United States, but all across the Western world, all across Europe and Canada, grandparent alienation is all over the place. Part of that is because nobody's married. All right, and when people have a child together and then they hate each other, then they ignore each other's parents. And so what happens is that when you have children and they have kids, you don't have grandkids anymore. I mean, fewer and fewer children are growing up involved with their grandparents. I mean, you think about how quickly, can you think about human history for thousands and thousands of years, the cohesion of the family, you've had extended families and so forth, and it's got whittled down, so the family is getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And now just whittling it down to just you and the kids. And when the kids grow up, a lot of times when they leave, unless you're still giving them money, they don't come back either. I mean, that's a character trait called loyalty, and it's been diminishing and diminishing and diminishing. And I mean, I know because of what I see, I'm pretty sure you're seeing it too, how many people who are 50 and up who are broken up because they have no contact with their grandkids. Or if they do, their grandkids have absolutely no respect for them. None. They come over and all they do is look at their devices. Okay, they don't say please, they don't say thank you, they barely say hi. Okay, and so grandparents have very little influence unless the grandparents are used as babysitters. Then they get to be involved. Okay, so this is happening on epidemic levels today. So acts of selfishness lead to feelings of offense. Acts of selfishness lead to feelings of offense, and it alienates people from each other. Now, relationships, when it comes to fulfillment, you don't do fulfillment without relationships. Okay, we are social creatures. We cannot be fulfilled on a desert island with the coconut tree. Okay, it just doesn't work that way. We're social. We need other people. Consider cluster B personality traits. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with those guys. Okay, if it wasn't for cluster Bs, I mean, that's half our business. Dealing with cluster B personality traits. Now, consider being married to somebody with borderline personality, narcissistic personality, or antisocial personality is, fill in the blanks, what is it? Is it more boring than with a non-personality disordered spouse? More fulfilling than a non-personality disordered spouse? Easier than with a non-personality disordered spouse? More painful, difficult, and frustrating than with a non-personality disordered spouse, or the same as with a non-personality disordered spouse? Now, take your time. What do you think?
D.
Anybody not think D is right? All right. You see, I bring this up, and it sounds silly. It's so obvious that it's not silly. But when people in academia, the academicians are so, they don't deal with the real world. I mean, they're always about, there is no evil. There is no good and bad. And I had this argument when I was being trained in psychiatry. We had still, back in those days, there were still a lot of psychodynamic psychiatrists. And I remember getting into an argument about the Nazis being wrong. Okay, that you can't say they were bad. You can't say that's evil. There's no such thing. And I'm like, this is stupid. This is just, to even argue this, we're literally having an argument about whether or not the Nazis were evil. Okay, well, yeah, how do you fight that? I'm going to get into that. Because this is very tough. This whole mindset, you realize by this attitude of yours, if that becomes widespread, you allow this stuff to happen again. Okay? All right, it's important that we have a moral center here, and you need to, this whole thing of, it doesn't matter, there's no evil, all your choices are good, that's crazy. When you look at human history, and we're going to look at that actually today. Some of this stuff is pretty bad. All right. Now take a look at what is it about borderlines that make them hard to hard to like sometimes, okay? Sometimes. Now they do have, my first wife was borderline, so they do have their charming side. So in their defense, they can be very charming, all right? They really can. And so there's some part, they can make you feel really special because they got that over-idealization side, okay? That's wonderful while you're riding on the way up. Okay. Yeah. Emotional lability. What does that mean? Well, when you're talking about borderlines, emotional lability is not about pseudo-bulbar affect where they break down and cry a lot. It's more about they go from happy to mad really fast. Okay, and you don't know when it's going to happen. Okay, so basically you're walking on eggshells. That's what walking on eggshells means. With narcissists and borderlines, they flip into anger over things that you can't even predict. And so you end up in the battle. You're not just walking along and then you get PTSD because you never know when the mind's going to go off on you, okay? Because they do that, okay? And then you have anxiety. You say, what's so bad about anxiety? Well, there are a lot of things that are bad about it, but one thing that's bad about anxiety is anxiety and anger are right next to each other. As the more angry you get, anger comes out, okay? The more anxious you get, the more likely anger has come out. I was at a friend's house last week. It's kind of an embarrassing situation. There's a group of us, and him and his wife were there. We were talking in their living room, and he decides he wants to light a fire. He's really excited to show off his fireplace there. So he gets all this wood in there, he starts the fire. Well, you know how you're supposed to light some paper first and get the flue nice and hot so the smoke will go up? Didn't quite do it enough. And so he lights the fire and the whole house fills up with smoke. So he gets really anxious, and then he starts screaming at his wife to bring a fan. And just as he was yelling at her, it was like, we were all feeling very uncomfortable because it was like you're blaming her for this. I mean, it was kind of caustic, okay? And everybody was like, okay, this isn't cool. You shouldn't talk to your wife like this, okay? Because it was like, okay, it's your fault that the house is full of smoke. He didn't say that, but in his anxiety, it came out in anger, and that's what it seemed to communicate, all right? And so anxiety makes relationships difficult. That's something you better apologize for, and you should probably need to put the brakes on that if you can, okay? All right, impulsivity. Oh yeah, who doesn't love somebody that's impulsive? I mean, it might sound romantic if you're not married, but you don't want that, okay? Impulsivity, not thinking. I mentioned this in many other programs before, how our brains work and why we are built so that we should get a handle on impulsivity. We have the mechanisms to address that. All right, so here's what happens. Your amygdala, the amygdala is hyper-emotional, and it over-responds to every adverse stimulus. It does. We see something in the environment that we don't like, and our amygdala registers at a 10 out of 10 offense. Okay? Oh my gosh, there's a stain on the carpet that wasn't there last week. I need to blame somebody. I need to yell about this because, this can't be tolerated. And then what happens, because your prefrontal cortex has afferents, it has sensory nerves inside the amygdala, and it's constantly looking at what the amygdala is upset about. What are you bothered by now? Now what is it? Okay? And so your logical brain assesses what you're freaked out about. And it says, okay, it's a stain. It's not that difficult. It's not like it's chokeberry juice or something really bad. It's just, come on. I mean, it's a little bit of chocolate. We can clean that. It's not a big deal. And so then what happens is through the uncinate fasciculus, the logical brain connects directly to the emotional brain, and it brings the temperature down. It reduces the valence of that threat. And so instead of overreacting, instead of feeling 10 out of 10 anger and 10 out of 10 fear, it drops down to 2 out of 10. That's how the prefrontal cortex works. When people have brain injury, when they have head trauma and damage to those prefrontal circuits, that's why they become impulsive. That's why they act first and think later, because of damage to those circuits. Now, in borderlines, you have a situation where the amygdala is so overreactive that the logical brain is a little bit slow, and so you end up with a lot of impulsive things, and impulsive things are usually negative, impulsive, angry things. So you get mad and do things that you regret later. Okay, you get mad and people will do revenge sex with somebody else. I see that a lot. Boy, does that damage relationships. They go out and get a tattoo okay, that if they'd been in their right mind, they wouldn't have picked that tattoo. I can tell you some stories there, boy. Okay, they do things that have permanent effects. I mean, I could go through over 22 years, I could go through a whole lot of stories telling you things that people did on impulse that totally changed the course of their life. Impulsivity is extremely damaging to relationships. Okay? Risk-taking. All right, now why risk-taking? Why do borderlines do risk-taking? Now, that's a lot of times risk-taking and impulsivity go together. Okay? All right? But risk-taking, borderlines are, and antisocials, actually, they kind of have this in common. They are high in novelty-seeking. Are you all familiar with Cloninger? Robert Cloninger? Okay, Cloninger is, when it comes to theories of personality, he wrote a book called Feeling Good, not the Burns book, because Burns also wrote a book called Feeling Good, and his book was way more popular. Cloninger's book is definitely written for people with graduate level education and above. His vocabulary is astounding. He's a PhD, MD, and he's got videos and everything out. But the problem is that he's on such a high level that you got to sit down and you read a chapter and you got a headache, because it's when you sit down and after you digest it, you go, wow, this is deep stuff, and it's right. But for crying out loud, man, this is complicated. He just twists you all around. He doesn't speak normal English at all, okay? But when you listen to the guy, you're like, what? Because he's got this rasp, and he talks like and you're trying to figure out what he's saying. But he's got good stuff. It's just his presentation is very different. So anyway, he has this, are you familiar with the Temperament and Character Inventory, the TCI? No? Okay. Well, basically, it's you can take it online, and what it does is it breaks your temperament and character down, and it's very descriptive of your personality. Okay? And there are 3 axes to personality in the Temperament and Character Inventory. On the one axis, we have harm avoidance. What is harm avoidance? Is how, when bad things happen to you, how much does it bother you? How much do you regurgitate that in your mind? How much do you fear harm? How much do you fear harm, loss, pain, and shame? Now you have some people who are very high on the list. They fear a lot. And these people tend to be anxious and pessimistic because for them, they're way over here. Okay? High harm avoidance. And then there are people who are very low harm avoidance. These are people who are carefree. What's another word? They're carefree, easygoing, they don't care. Bad things happen, they forget about it and do it again. Okay? They are cavalier. So from cavalier to cautious, that's the spectrum for harm avoidance. So that's one aspect of your temperament, which this is what you're born with, okay? Now another aspect of temperament is reward dependence. Okay, reward dependence is how much do I need other people to pat me on the back and tell me I'm a good boy? Okay, how much do I need accolades? How much do I need people to constantly reassure me that I am really a good person and I'm likable and doggone it, how much do I need that? Well, some people need it a lot, all right? And they're very trustful and warm to the point of sometimes being too trustful because they're constantly looking for that pat on the back. And then you have people over here who are aloof. They're happy living in a cabin in the woods. They don't need very much social interaction. Now everybody needs some. Even with your most schizoid patient, even though there's not anybody around, they still have that need. And if there's nobody that loves them, they still don't do well. Okay, so I'm not saying that there are people out there that need nobody, but there are some people that just don't need very much. A little goes a long way for these folks, okay? So there's a spectrum between aloof and very trustful and actually socially demanding, because if you demand too much positive reinforcement from others, that's a problem too, okay? Now the other one is novelty seeking. All right. Now on this spectrum, we have some people that they have like very little novelty seeking. They like predictable. They love predictable. My stepfather was like that. When I was growing up, I was responsible because my mom worked nights, and so I had to prepare meals all the time. And every day of the week, we ate the same thing. I mean, on Monday we had like TV dinners. On Tuesday we had like pot pies. On Wednesday, it's like every day. And you don't mix that up. He knew what to expect. Okay, I like things the same. He liked predictable. And when things were unpredictable, he had emotionally. He had problems with that big time. He liked to know what to expect. And then you have same TV shows and everything, right? And then you have people who are high in novelty seeking, which means they get bored very easily. They like spice. They like to change things up. Borderlines tend to be like that, okay? Which is fine until they want to change you up, okay? All right? So that's the thing, is that, the love for novelty seeking is, that's fine to a degree, but novelty seeking in relationships becomes very pathologic when that becomes a part of sexuality. You see, that's another big issue, is that novelty and sexuality don't go together if you're talking marriage, okay? All right, hostility. Well, that doesn't need any. Well, we talked about anger, right? So do we need to discuss hostility? Yeah, because when you're talking borderlines and stuff, that hostility takes anger to another level. Hostility is manifested when someone offends you, and instead of responding to the offense and saying something politically correct, instead of saying something that's measured and using I statements, you go for the jugular. I'm going to say something that's going to do the most damage. Everything is, okay, nuclear option. What'd you say? Nuclear. Nuclear. I mean, there's no guns, no hand grenades. Everything is a nuclear attack. So that they go for the most vulnerable openings they can get. And they say things that they can't be taken back. And what is said is designed to devastate. Now, why do they do that? Why? Why do they let loose with the most painful things that they can say to wound and shame? Why?
Need for control?
Need for control. Why do they need to control?
They feel like they've lost it.
Okay. They feel like they've lost it. Yes, there is that. If you think about at the core of borderline narcissistic antisocial, the prevailing theory is, of course, that very often, not always, but very often it's due to reactive attachment issues. And the prevailing overall nonverbal sensation is that of shame. It's, I'm not worth loving. Didn't happen at the right time, and so they have this pervasive sense of not being worth loving. And so there's a pathologic fear that others will find out just how unworthy they are. And they don't want people to see them that way. And so when they perceive that you've seen through the veil, when they perceive that you could expose them, it's like, this is an emergency, and I've got to shut you down right now. I have to put you in your place right now, or else everyone will find out about me. Now, they don't use those words, but it's that kind of, it's an emergency. You are like a big grizzly bear, and I'm this helpless infant, and I'm just using everything I have because you're more powerful than I am. And so, they don't feel that I statements are going to get the job done. All right? So we see a lot of this. Now, this is extremely damaging to relationships. This is why the relationships break up, though. You whip out the nuclear option every time, and after a while, there's nobody left in the neighborhood. Okay? The over-idealization, devaluation, that's part of that devaluation slide, and they go into it. And when you get the devaluation where you're treated as worse than a worm, that's very damaging to relationships. It's what you do. Now, similar things, there are similar unpleasant things with antisocial personality. With antisocial, you got a number of things that are not consistent with relationships, grandiosity. The problem with grandiosity is that if you're up here, where does that leave the rest of us? That means, if you have a grandiose sense of self, then we're just little people. And that gives them permission to do bad behaviors because they are so much more important. You have this pathologic lying. That's a form of manipulation. We're going to get into that later. Conning, manipulative, lack of guilt or remorse. That's a big problem because if somebody steps on your toes and doesn't even say excuse me or sorry, you're probably not going to let them around your toes anymore after that, okay? Yeah. Failure to accept responsibility for their actions, a parasitic lifestyle. Okay, you ever have somebody come over for a few days, 2 years later, they're still on your couch? Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah, okay. And it doesn't bother them, it's like, yeah. All right, many short-term relationships, hello. So these personality disorders are characterized by experiences, by feelings, by offenses, by behaviors that are offensive and that make affection extremely, extremely difficult. Okay? Now, one of the reasons that people liked Star Wars when it first came out is not just because of all the cinematography and the lightsabers and stuff like that. One thing that resonated with audiences was the personification of good and evil. It was like a Western. You had clear villains and clear heroes. It's very refreshing. You had a light side and a dark side. And the dark side was about evil that everybody could identify with. Okay, fear, hatred, greed, suffering, the hunger for power. Dark side. And then the good side, courage, love, generosity, contentment. You see that and you go, yeah, of course, that's consistent with real life. This is what we really see. It's nice to see the good side win. Right? Now, we've come a long way since 1977. And, it's the light side and the dark side, they're both good. They're both good. That's kind of where we are in our culture today, and it's doing some damage. Right? Now, when you try to talk about values and ethics, you risk being accused of moralizing. All right? Moralizing is having or displaying an overly critical point of view on issues of right and wrong, typically with an unfounded air of superiority. You're saying murder is a bad thing. You think rape is always a bad thing? It's like, yeah, kind of. No, that's moralizing.
Just kind of.
Yeah. Right. In 1966, there was a book called Situation Ethics, and this kind of book, Joseph Fletcher proposed an ethic of loving concern. Certain acts such as lying, premarital sex, adultery, stealing, even murder might be morally right depending on the circumstances. So, we in our Judeo-Christian culture, we just call these things sins and wrong. There are circumstances where all of these things that we call wrong are okay. And it's based on, if as a culture we invented morality, then we can just rewrite it according to the situation. That's much more loving, rather than give people labels if they cross these particular lines. So at that time it was called situation ethics. Today it has grown up into what we consider moral relativism. Okay? And it's the same thing. It's the exact same idea. And unfortunately, it's taught in universities, and it's present in our culture, it's present in our entertainment, whereas this is now the predominating moral theory. It's like, okay, here we go. It's all relative. And if to say anything different, you are accused of moralizing. All right? Now, this is a clip from this book. I don't really do a lot of spy novels. I like the narrator of this, and so I got hooked into the series. It's called Rage. It's like the last book of the series. And very good dialogue in it and everything. I wouldn't recommend... Well, never mind. Okay. I came across, because I was putting this together, and as I was listening to it, and I said, oh, this particular interchange is actually relevant here. Because it discusses these two people who are both really bad, okay? They're both killed 1,000 people, okay? So, they're really horrible people. They're criminals. And one of the guys is describing how he became a criminal. He started out working for the CIA, and he started making decisions. And what happened was every time he would make a compromised decision, it got easier to make the next one. And he did the whole time without feeling that he was a bad guy. Now, I'm not sure if this is going to play because I'm not sure if the sound is actually going to work. Whenever I depend on sound, 2 times out of 3, it fails. So let's see if it's going to work here.
Soldier, and then I went into the CIA. I was a case manager. I worked jobs in the field that put me in direct opposition to people like us. People like me. I arrested some, popped caps in others, never blinked, and frankly never bothered with trying to crawl inside their heads. Oh, sure, I used whatever psych profile our teams generated, but at no time did I try to be them, like some agents do. I was never into the method-acting version of law enforcement. I was all tradecraft. So, then I began stepping over the line, skimming some cash from arms dealers, pocketing hard drives of information on key players, and then using that data for some lucrative blackmail, like that. It never felt like crime to me because I was stealing from people who were very corrupt, people who were worse than me. Even when I had to cut a throat or two, it was no big thing. I was never the bad guy. In fact, I felt a little like P.T. Barnum. You know who he was, the circus guy? Well, he said something about there being a sucker born every minute, suggesting that if people are dumb enough to get taken, then it was on them rather than any fault of whoever took them. That's where I was. I had absolutely no pity for whoever got in my way. Over time, my plays got bigger, involved more risk, and I guess I lost sight of where that line in the sand was. I became a criminal, and a really bad one, or good one, depending on how you see it, without ever having a shaving mirror moment where I saw my face and said, yeah, that fellow there is evil as...
You see what happened here? You know, just you progressively made decisions one after the other of compromise. And pretty soon, you know, you're stealing from people, but you know what? If they were stupid enough to get taken, it's their fault. These are defense mechanisms to make yourself feel better. Now, what we see in borderlines is, what do they do to justify their crimes against their so-called loved ones? They vilify them. They demonize them. It's their fault. They are horrible. They did it first. So when I did this to them, they deserved it. And so that's where that devaluation is very important, so they can feel better about what they did. Or, in this particular case, if you're that stupid, come on, you made it easy. If you'd been wiser, this wouldn't have happened to you. Your foolishness is what got you took. It's your fault. Okay?
Even when I got involved with the Majestic program and developed my own scheme with a bioweapon and some Cold War mind control stuff, I still didn't see anyone in the mirror I would have called evil. For a long time, especially in prison, I actually did some soul searching, looking inward to find my flaws. It was like having some of your lights off and searching in the dark for the breakers. But I guess here's the important part. Here's what I found. Do tell. I found I like the darkness. No, wait, don't give me that look. I'm not saying I really am evil. I still don't see myself that way. It's just that I recognize and accept that my personal code of ethics is truly my own. It isn't defined by the Ten Commandments or the Constitution of the United States or any oath I swore. I am who I am. Not evil, not good, but beyond that. Or maybe apart from that.
Okay. Now, this is a really telling thing here. It's like, I don't accept moral conventions of other people. So in order for me to be bad, in order for my murder and my thievery to be bad, I have to accept your moral code. I don't accept the Ten Commandments. I don't accept that stuff. And so if I have my own situation ethics value system. So according to my ethical code, I'm still good. All right? There's a lot of this going on.
You are dangerously close to describing sociopathy.
Very good point.
Maybe, but that's better than evil, isn't it?
My favorite line. Okay. What's the difference?
It's a good question.
Yeah, there's virtually no difference. No. No, but according to, according to the current ethical standard that people are using, there's a huge difference. Is that there is no evil. According to, if you look at moral relativism, there is no evil, and so it's like, what might be evil for you is not evil for somebody else.
You are dangerously close to describing sociopathy. Maybe, but that's better than evil, isn't it? Evil is something I have spent much time contemplating. Except in very rare cases, it is nothing more than a concept constructed by civilized man, and therefore it is subject to civil laws and either judicial or sociological interpretations. If all humans had an innate sense of good and evil, then everyone would have to own guilt for what they do. However, we know that is not true. Before, there was a society structure. Even before formalized tribes, people did whatever they had to do in order to survive. There was no good and evil at all. There was survival or death. Evil as a concept is a reflection of the laws people created once they chose to live together. Evil is representative. It is the thing we fear when the cement that holds society together is disregarded by someone who does not accept its absolute nature. Conquerors should, by standard and especially contemporary civilized assessments, all be evil. And yet look at how you Americans revere Christopher Columbus. The Greeks worshipped Alexander, but do you think the people he conquered hold him up as an icon of good? They were forced to laud him openly, yes, but in their hearts. Genghis Khan was a hero to his people and the devil to many. Kings and great generals are both God and devil. This was Napoleon, Pol Pot, Hitler, Tamerlane, Hannibal Barca, Francisco Pizarro, Cyrus the Great, Attila, Julius Caesar, Hari Singh Nalwa, and so many others. People like you and me, my friend, do not take the path of the sheep, accepting values merely because society says we should. We stand on a higher ground so that we look over the rabble to see what is for us the promised land, the reward for our efforts.
Okay, so this is, what he's saying is moral relativism is the truth. Basically, take a look at all the conquerors. They might have been murderers and stuff like that, but they were actually, they won, and so now we see them as good people because they were conquerors. Just like us, we kill thousands of people, but we're conquerors and we're above those moral conventions. Good and evil are merely the subjective opinions of the tribe on acceptable behavior. Evil people are just free thinkers who are unwilling to go along with groupthink. They are above the sheep. And that is exactly what Hitler thought. That's exactly what Stalin thought. That's exactly what Pol Pot thought. And the Khmer Rouge and all that stuff, okay? Alright, so we have a new morality that says, thou shalt not be racist, thou shalt not be sexist, thou shalt not be homophobic, thou shalt not claim that your religion is the only correct path to God, and all other claims of morality are subjective. Okay, and that's kind of what we have today, okay? That's where we're at. Now, what's the respond to that? How do we get around that? Well, we have the theistic approach, which says there is objective morality. That yes, this is a God thing. Morality comes from God, and it's defined by our Creator, and these rules are absolute. Murder is always wrong, so is adultery, false testimony, envy, rape, greed, incest, and so forth. Self-sacrificial love is good, as are generosity, kindness, forgiveness, mercy, purity, honesty, thankfulness, humility, perseverance, faithfulness, hopelessness, and justice. So we have good and we have bad, and it's something that man didn't come up with. This is God thing, and that's one way of that's one objection to moral relativism. Now, what if you don't include the God thing? Then what do we have? How do we get around that? Well, there is some evidence that morality, as I mentioned this earlier, is genetic. Okay, there is a considerable amount of evidence that we are born with the genetic code, and every culture has demonstrated that that's part of us. There's a very good book. There are several books on this issue. I don't know what happened with my slides. I'm going, what in the world is going on here? Okay, have you ever heard of moral foundations theory? Moral foundations theory basically says that the moral foundations are innate. They are genetic. And it's based on an assessment of multiple cultures currently and historically, going through the literature that of all of history, and taking a look at what we have today, there are 5 moral virtues that every culture has recognized from the beginning of recorded history. And these are those values. 1, do not harm the innocent. Everybody around the world agrees with that. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Again, there's no going around that, okay? Everybody agrees with that. Now, we violate these all the time, but those are values that we all recognize. Respect authority. That includes military, police, family, and so forth. Loyalty. Be loyal to parents, grandparents, the people that have supported you when you were weak. And purity. And purity is divided into dietary, sexual, and hygiene. These values have shown up in different ways, but consistently for all cultures throughout time. That suggests that these are innate, and there's a boatload of literature to support. If you Google moral foundations theory, you see all the evidence for it, but it's quite amazing. What that does is it suggests that these things are not just assigned by culture, but that they are built in. Now, why is that important? Well, it's this. If this is true, and these values are there, what that means is that when these virtues are violated and we are the victim, we are going to be offended, and it's going to damage the relationship. Because, again, we're still talking about love. We're still talking about affection. How does ethics affect the capacity for sustained affection? That's what we're discussing. Okay? So that when we behave in ways that violate these, and we feel offended, now the relationship is at risk. Love and belonging, something I need, is at risk if I violate these guys. Now, our culture today, they recognize the first 2, don't harm the innocent and treat others as you want to be treated. Nobody will disagree with that. What we do find disagreement on are the latter 3. Respect for authority, loyalty, and purity. Those guys, no, that's your opinion. You're moralizing if you say that we should have those. The problem, first of all, with the theory of moral foundations theory is, how do we explain sociopathy? How do we explain those 2 criminals? If it's built in, shouldn't we all take responsibility for our behaviors? Shouldn't we all immediately recognize when we violate them if it's built in?
Mutation. Genetic mutation.
Mutation, okay. Yeah, maybe we've mutated our way out of it, okay. One of the things that we saw, though, in that clip is that, if you slowly start to make excuses for why you harm the innocent, why do you treat people in ways you don't want to be treated? Well, I have an excuse. I have a reason. And you keep making excuses. Those excuses include rationalization, generalization, projection, okay? What are you doing with those guys? You are taking the responsibility off yourself and putting it on others. So those are your reasons for why you're harming the innocent. Those are your reasons for why you're treating people the way you wouldn't want to be treated. Those are your reasons for rejecting authority, okay, and not being loyal, okay? There are excuses, and we can do that. We have that ability, so that's one of the reasons that we have sociopathy.